Hey guys, so I'm realizing that this is going to be the first video that I'm uploading with the fancy bun.
Hello.
We're going to be responding to a video that we saw today on Sunday. It's from a channel that the Satiratician, I think it is.
Satiratician.
However you pronounce it. That guy.
Play doctor guy.
He posted a video from this same YouTuber, but we found this other video on her channel that seemed a little bit more relevant. So we thought we'd respond sort of off the cuff.
Also, just a little background, I, Fancy Bun, have dreadlocks, and this video of hers is talking about white people with dreadlocks. I am Caucasian, I am Irish, French Canadian, and Norwegian, I believe.
Right.
So I'm pretty white. And because I'm a white person with dreadlocks, and this is an opinion about white people with dreadlocks, I felt I had a lot of perspective that I could bring to the conversation.
Right. I'm going to link the video in the below bar, but I'm not going to put clips of it or anything in here because it's obnoxious. The way that she speaks is just upsetting.
It's trying not to be too judgmental. She talks very, very slow and with very disjointed thoughts, so it's very difficult to kind of follow her train of thought. It took Madam and I several listens through just to kind of put together her full points and make sure that we're responding
and giving her a fair shot.
Right. Trying to really understand her point and then give a fair response in return.
So as a result, we're not going to show the clips. We're just going to read the points as we understood them. So point number one, this is one more for Fancy Bun. She made the point that if you as a white person are a young soul, going with the idea of reincarnation and how many times you go through the cycle, etc., etc., if you're a young soul, you are more likely to fall into the trap of getting dreadlocks as a white person because you're a young soul and are too curious to know any better.
Right. The idea is that her basic point is that every single white person in the world who's ever born instantaneously starts getting brainwashed into thinking that they are superior, about white superiority. And young souls are more susceptible to taking that bait. And essentially, I guess her point is that then leads to them getting dreadlocks because they're just too naive to really be respective otherwise, I guess. And as someone with dreadlocks, as someone who's kind of had a really harsh life, and I've seen some things, I take some offense to being called a young soul. I do believe in reincarnation, so I'm willing to kind of go along with her on this woo-woo
right,
trip.
as opposed to me, Madam, who just has no interest in this business.
Yeah, Madam doesn't play along with this. I kind of do. I will, go along on this journey with her. But to say that I'm a young soul is essentially
a lie.
A lie. It's disingenuous, and it's kind of offensive. It devalues someone's decisions, and I think it's just not a good place to start.
Right, it's the woo-woo equivalent of trying to pull rank on you.
Yeah.
So then she goes on to make this point that, she's seen dreadlocks because she was part of a hippie culture somehow. Not really. She said she only went to a couple of parties and didn't actually know the person that she's judging with dreadlocks. She just kind of saw him and made this kind of decision. As someone who's always lived in Austin, as someone who is very, 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 very familiar with hippie culture, with, those sorts of mentalities of people who are living more naturally and people who are interested in Mother Earth and things of that degree, I've never really known a hippie to be the kind of person who's going to try and righteous virtue signal you. Hipsters, yes, but old school hippies, the people who purposefully sold their homes and moved out into the middle of the woods to try and live a simpler life, those people are not really the ones who care that much about what's on your head. And in fact, hippie culture has a lot to do with American culture in general moving forward with love, things like
and
race
joy.
And, religion.
Accepting all people, and no matter what they look like or where they came from, just love, joy, and acceptance. I don't think people should really be talking down to them as much as they do.
And on top of it, I don't think that the guy that she's talking about, number one, either exists or that she has a very clear perspective of what was happening there.
Okay, so the basic story, since we're kind of glossing over this, is she says she goes to this hippie party. She's not much of a hippie, she's more of a punk person, and if you watch this video, she has blue-green hair, which will become a point later.
Yeah.
But it's kind of funny that she's talking about
dreadlocks and naturalism.
And not doing things to your hair that your hair doesn't normally do. But that's going forward. So she goes to this party with a bunch of hippies, and this guy comes in with dreadlocks.
And he's so hot.
And she reports that he's just so hot, and that he just sits down and he expects to be worshipped. I've never seen someone like that, and if he exists, he's an asshole. That's not indicative of every single person who has dreadlocks. But she's using him as a prime example for all of her arguments.
Biases. And on top of it, again, she states plainly that she didn't meet him, she doesn't know him, she just encountered him at a party, and this was her impression. So that's a fun one. She then goes on to say that, like we were just mentioning, dreadlocks are really reserved for those whose hair naturally does that, quote unquote.
Yeah, she was saying that her basic argument, it's the common one, we hear it all the time, that only black people are allowed to have dreads.
And she specifically says people of African descent. So people outside of Africa are the people she's talking about. Anyone outside of Africa should not or does not have, cultural rights to dreadlocks.
Right. Which is, again, a very common notion. I've heard it all the time, and I always roll my eyes. The point is, dreadlocks are a human thing. It's something that your hair does if you do not keep it from doing it. Oftentimes in today, and most people would like their dreadlocks to be manageable.
Thin and somewhat,
so that they can actually move it around. If they just do nothing to it, it will become one giant dreadlock, which is not anyone would want that.
Right. Well, okay. First of all, it's not even really just a human thing. I did a little bit of digging on this, and see, a little bit of digging. And there's evidence that we have Neanderthals presenting dreadlocks. There are also very well-documented cases of ancient Egyptians having dreadlocks. Now, why is this relevant? Egyptians are technically from Africa. We've all heard this before with that crazy lady on the stairwell. The difference is, the Egyptians made a cultural distinction between themselves and the Nubians, who were the quote-unquote black-skinned people. They subjugated the Nubians, and they had a different fashion sense than the Nubians, and the Egyptians, the lighter-skinned people in these reliefs, had dreadlocks.
It's a mark of pride, it's a mark of status.
Right. Having long hair in Egypt in those old days meant that you could afford to be free of lice and pestilence. It meant that you were a clean person, which was very, very rare. This is why, for centuries, they also waxed their heads clean, because they didn't like dealing with lice. If you were a person with dreadlocks or long, luxurious hair, you were very wealthy. It was a sign of status. Okay, she also goes on to say that, quote-unquote, they, meaning black people, don't highlight the ability to have dreadlocks the way that white people do.
Which is silly. Dreadlocks have always been a mark of pride, even for myself. When you put that much effort into something, it becomes part of your soul. And if she wants to be talking about incarnation and young souls and things, she has to realize that putting a lot of love and effort into something, some part of you, becomes part of you. It isn't bragging, it isn't highlighting, it's just being yourself. Yes, there's become this new fashion where celebrities will put their hair up in dreadlocks and things like that, which is interesting. I think it's a little bit silly, but I mean, I like the way dreadlocks look, so I can't really fault them for also liking them.
Right. The other thing, though, is it's not just white people who have dreadlocks that highlight their dreadlocks. Have you not ever heard of Bob Marley? Have you not ever seen the Rastafari movement and what it stands for? Among other things, part of the sacred tenets is having hair in a dreadlock or dreadlock-like state. It's part of their religion. It's not just an opinion, man.
It's spiritual.
Right. The other idea, okay, she goes on to say that, quote-unquote, dreadlocks aren't natural, and if your hair doesn't do that, you shouldn't be wearing them. Well, are you saying that there's not a black person or a quote-unquote African descendant who doesn't wear hair that isn't the way it naturally appears out of their head? Are you just completely deaf and blind to American and European culture? Have you not seen...
Have you looked in a mirror?
Right, like you, lady, have blue-ish, green-ish hair That's not natural.
That takes a lot of time. I've known people who dye their hair like that. You have to dye it regularly.
Every
and
4
it's
weeks.
so harsh to your hair.
It's harsh on your
It
hair.
is far more unnatural than dreadlocks.
Right. Dreadlocks are actually utilitarian. They don't have to be washed as often. They don't require any maintenance.
Dude, some people don't even wash their hair, their dreadlocks, more than once a month. And I thoroughly love the ability to just tie my hair up with itself. I don't need hairbands anymore. At any point in time, I can get it out of my face the way I need to. It's very versatile, it's very utilitarian, and it's an extension of who you are.
Right. And something else that I find fascinating, are we going to talk about dreadlocks on white people and not talk about the way in which black people have worn dreadlocks as a fashion statement? Artists like Rihanna, artists like Zendaya have worn dreadlocks to a singular event, dreadlocks that are not part of their natural hair, something that is an extension, but they've worn it as a fashion statement and then changed their hair again. Is that somehow wrong? I don't think so. I don't think there's anything wrong with an artist doing that as a part of their fashion, but by her logic, those people should be just as culpable.
Yeah, again, I like the way dreadlocks look. I think they're wonderful. I love the texture. I love the way that it just sort of winds together and creates all these shapes. I don't think it's really fair to fault anyone else for wanting to have them, even for a short time.
At all. The last thing that she kind of makes the point of at the very end in this rambling video, she says, whites, having dreads and fashioning dreads is ridiculous, and black people know this. Don't be fooled. Whiteys. She used the term whiteys.
She used the term whiteys, and that is probably
the funniest part of this whole thing.
I don't even... Just the term whiteys always makes me laugh.
It sounds like something Uncle Ruckus would say.
It sounds like tidy whiteys.
Right.
It sounds like underwear.
Okay, to the point, though. I have to ask very seriously if she has ever had an interaction with a black classmate or with a classmate of a different ethnicity, because if she's actually saying this, she very clearly hasn't.
Also, I can tell you from experience that every single black person that I have met in Austin who have seen my dreads in the past 2 years has congratulated me and told me that they like them.
Right.
They've asked me how long I've had them, what I did to put them in.
They've asked about what kind of stuff she uses, and this includes black people who themselves have dreadlocks. It's a sign of community. It's not a sign of race or discrimination.
Yeah, I don't think I'm being fooled that they are super against me having them.
And they're just being mean by showing interest in giving compliments?
Asking me how they're doing?
This whole video smacks of someone who has never really had an interaction with someone of a different ethnicity or viewpoint. It smacks of someone who didn't even bother to talk to the one white guy they've seen with dreadlocks. It's a big, giant bias soup, and it's a bunch of bullshit.
It's a very narrow view of the world, and for someone who's trying to talk about young souls and spirituality and having dreams that inspire her, it's willfully ignorant. I think it's got to be at some point kind of willful to not see other people's perspective.
Frankly, I have asked myself a couple of times now if this person is a Poe. I don't think so, seeing as they've made several videos now, but it's to that level. She's that kind of stupid. So if you can stand the video, go ahead and watch it. I'll leave it in the link below. Otherwise, this is just a sort of response to give our opinions.
Yeah, I mean, I've been wanting to give this general response for a long time because, like I said, I've heard this argument so many times just in my time of having dreadlocks that it's something that I've had a lot of opinion and a lot of time to think about.
Well, we hope that you've enjoyed it.